Karen stood with a clipboard, smirking. "Your house violates HOA codes," she said. "Demolish it or face legal action." It wasn't just a house. It was his family's legacy. But Karen didn't care. What happened next shocked everyone, especially her. But let's start from the beginning.
It all began when Karen Thompson, the infamous HOA president, came to my door one chilly morning. I had just finished my cup of coffee, still groggy, when I saw her standing on my porch, clipboard in hand, a smug look on her face. Her sharp, cold eyes scanned my house as if she were judging a criminal. "Your house violates several HOA codes," Karen declared, her voice as brittle as the dry leaves crunching beneath her feet. "You'll have to demolish it, or we'll take legal action." I stood there, utterly stunned. Was she serious? The house wasn't just any structure. It had been in my family for over 80 years, passed down through generations. A piece of history, really. It was a national landmark, something that should be celebrated, not condemned. But Karen didn't care about any of that. She looked at the peeling paint on the facade, the creaking shutters, the aged fixtures, details she believed signified neglect. What she didn't understand, what she couldn't possibly fathom, was the history that ran through these walls. I felt the pressure building in my chest, the weight of her words sinking in. Anger, disbelief, and frustration churned inside me, fighting to break free. How could she be so blind to what this house represented? How could she stand there as if she held all the power and demand the destruction of something that had stood the test of time? "Are you seriously telling me this?" I managed to say, my voice barely steady. But Karen's gaze never wavered. She was unwavering, relentless, and for her there was no room for history or sentiment. This wasn't just about codes or regulations, it was about her power, her control over our small community. And I was the next target. I couldn't let this stand, not without a fight. But Karen was already turning away, her heels clicking on the steps as she scribbled something on her clipboard, like this was just another job. She never once looked back. In that moment, I knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Karen's demands quickly escalated, becoming more frequent and more vicious with each passing day. It wasn't enough for her to show up at my door once. She had to make my life unbearable. She began spreading rumors about my house, telling anyone who would listen that it was an eyesore, an unwanted blight on the neighborhood. According to her, it was a threat to property values. I could hear the whispers every time I stepped outside, feel the cold stares from my neighbors. The once friendly faces were now clouded with suspicion and judgment. It was like Karen had poisoned their minds, turning them against me. Every morning, without fail, there was a new email or text from her. More threats, more demands. "Fix it or face the consequences," she'd say. "You have no idea how much trouble you're in." I tried reasoning with her, hoping there was some room for understanding. I explained, calmly and patiently, that my home was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It was protected by federal law. There was no way, under any circumstance, that it could be demolished without significant legal procedures. But Karen wasn't listening. She didn't care. "The HOA has final authority on everything," she told me, her voice dripping with disdain, like she held all the power in the world. Historic designation? Didn't matter. She was the law here, in her eyes. It was baffling. Why was she doing this? What did she think she could possibly gain from forcing me out of my own home? Her obsession with control grew clearer every day. It wasn't about enforcing rules. It was personal. Karen saw herself as the arbiter of everything that was right for the neighborhood. She wanted to reshape it, mold it in her image, and my house, my history, didn't fit into her vision. I could feel her contempt, her relentless drive to push me out of the community. And I knew then that she would stop at nothing. This wasn't just about property codes. It was about power, and I wasn't going to let her take that from me. I'd had enough. Karen's constant harassment, the whispers from neighbors, her relentless attempts to tear my life apart. It was more than I could take. I knew I had to fight back, but I couldn't just do it with words anymore. I needed proof. So I began digging into the history of my house, every document, every letter of approval, every architectural plan that could validate my claim. I contacted city planners, architects, and the state's preservation board. I scoured old records, finding everything I needed to build my defense. It wasn't just about fighting Karen anymore. It was about reclaiming my home, proving its worth, and exposing her for the tyrant she was. I reached out to local news stations, hoping that the public eye would add weight to my cause. The media got involved, and soon enough, my story made headlines. Journalists were knocking on my door, asking questions, and the narrative began to shift. Karen's accusations fell apart as the truth came to light. The very house she'd been trying to destroy was a protected landmark, preserved by both the city and the state. The neighbors who had once blindly supported Karen started to question her. The seeds of doubt were planted, and they couldn't ignore the evidence that was now being presented to them. The truth had a way of cutting through the noise, and it was hard to deny when experts and journalists were involved. The tide was turning. But Karen, she didn't back down. Not even for a second. Despite the mounting evidence, despite the public scrutiny, she doubled down on her crusade. She continued to harass me, sending letters, making calls, trying to intimidate me into submission. It wasn't just about the property codes anymore. This was personal. And Karen wasn't about to let something like national historic preservation stand in her way. She had too much to lose in her twisted vision of control. I knew this fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Then, the unexpected happened. The weight of public outcry became too much for the HOA to ignore. They had no choice but to review their actions, and what they found was a mistake of epic proportions. Karen had overstepped her bounds, her abuse of power coming to light in a way she couldn't escape. The state's Historical Preservation Board, the very entity I had contacted in my fight, intervened, and suddenly the ground beneath Karen's feet shifted. Her reckless actions, her attempts to destroy something irreplaceable, came back to bite her. The HOA had no option left but to back down. The pressure was too strong, the truth too undeniable. My house, once threatened with destruction, was safe, but the consequences for Karen were even more severe. She didn't just lose the battle, she lost her position as HOA president. Her reputation, once built on control and arrogance, unraveled publicly, piece by piece. Her name became synonymous with failure, and her attempt to tear down my home became the very thing that destroyed her own power. It was a bittersweet victory. There was satisfaction in knowing that Karen's cruel ambition had been crushed by the weight of her own ignorance. The house stood, untouched and protected, while she was reduced to a figure of scorn. But for me, it wasn't just about winning. It was about standing up for what mattered. I had fought for my history, for the legacy that had been handed down through generations. I had refused to let a bully rewrite it, to erase it for the sake of her petty rules. And in the end, I felt a sense of triumph, relief even. Relief that I hadn't given in to fear or intimidation. Relief that the house, my family's home, would remain a testament to something bigger than any of us. As for Karen, she learned the hard way. You don't mess with someone's history, especially when that history is more important than your small, misguided rules.